Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Maqbool with you at PTB World. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at Pakistan's economic situation and, of course, in the ways that we would like to move forward. There is, of course, a lot of discussions as to how exactly measures in particularly tax and energy sectors and reforms that have been taking place by the incumbent government have been helping the economy with regards to, of course, the IMF's program, but also in terms of the ways in which the government actually plans to take away with this particular trend and to sustain the positive trajectory. We've seen the ADB report coming out as well that also talks about how the economic growth rate is going to stay at 2.5% this year. And this, of course, particularly important in terms of the kind of numbers that Pakistan expects to carry on. What exactly will these indicators actually reflect in terms of the policies and, of course, the infrastructure in place and the ways in which the government plans to move ahead, both with the IMF and, of course, with domestic policies at home remains to be seen. And how long can we actually talk about the measures that have been taken, particularly with regards to the ease of the monetary policy and other recommendations that the ADB also points in its report with reference to measures to be taken in terms of governance and, of course, inclusion of women in the economic sector. That is going to be our focus in the first segment of the show today. Our next one is also going to take a look at the economic situation, but at a global level, particularly in terms of the new policies coming in from the US administration and, of course, the very famous tariff that, of course, has been put forward by Mr. Trump and the trade war that many have been speaking about. What exactly that means in terms of the impact that it creates in the US's relations with other countries, most notably China, that has faced most of the brunt of these tariffs with 104% on Chinese goods being levied. And of course, this is more than double than what has been put in the past. And of course, in the ways in which this also impacts other countries like Canada and Mexico and of course, Japan in terms of the products that are coming in the US, but most importantly, the ways in which it impacts the US economy and the people of America that Mr. Trump has talked about, of how that in fact puts America first and in the ways that the public are going to benefit from this. Many economists argue otherwise, but we're going to be, of course, exploring whether that is the case or not in the short and long term and what that means for economies of other countries, including Pakistan, and the options that we have with regards to this. That is going to be our focus in the second segment of the show today. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal. And we've also been joined online by economist Mr. Nasir and Ms. Komal. Thank you very much for joining us and being a part of the discussion. Mr. Nasir, I'm going to start with you with reference to what we have seen so far happening in terms of the economic situation. There are good news and good numbers coming out. The ADB reports, of course, points out towards that. But I want your take in terms of how much of this is a cause for celebration and how much can we actually read into it in terms of taking forward the economy and ensuring that it in fact stays at what is being predicted.
I think like it's a very valid number because the way we were seeing this year is a much kind of a recovery year where we are hoping to have a very decent growth rate and probably we will be touching around 3% of the GDP and even slightly above that. And probably this indicates that we are recovering from a very deep recession where we are facing a lot of issues in terms of high inflation, in terms of high deficit, high interest rate, all these kind of issues were there, and probably this year is some sort of a year for stabilization. And whenever we call it a stabilization, it means we are with the IMF. We can't go for a very luxury type of intervention where we have massive spending. We can't do that. But with the decent numbers, we are hoping to have a very good balance in the coming year. And this time, as you know, the inflation is very much lower as per the expectation. On the other hand, there is a much ease in terms of interest rate, and that will help to boost businesses. Secondly, there is some sort of stability in terms of exchange rate. All these indicators show some sort of stability within the system. And then we have to materialize the benefit of this stability in the coming year. So the focus of the government for this current fiscal year to promote businesses through various kind of intervention, including this substantial reduction in the interest rate, keeping exchange rate in a very moderate position, and also like pushing some sort of reform agenda that really help the businesses. So these kind of activities is really looking toward the one key objective of the stability as well as the future long-term high growth. Because if we link with this growth number and the others number, those are coming out from the various projection either by ADB, either by the State Bank, either by the PBS. So they are all looking for a very high growth in terms of the future direction of the country. And as you know that we launched this very ambitious agenda of Udan Pakistan, where we assume that Pakistan economy would be a $1 trillion economy in next 1 decade. And to achieve that objective or the vision, we have to accelerate our economic growth up to around 6 to 7%. But this is a starting point where we need a stabilization, and the country is going in the right direction. And look at the some investment hopes from the other countries in terms of investment in minerals, investment in agriculture sector. So these are all kind of positive initiative or the positive like signals that will help us to actually regain the economic potential. But this is also some kind of a challenging situation for us, because if we call it an opportunity for stabilization, on the other hand, there are a lot of challenges that we need to address in terms of materializing the goal of very high and sustained economic growth. So in this case, if we have some kind of dividend in terms of some sort of fiscal space by reducing interest rate, in terms of saving money from the interest payment. On the other hand, if there is economic activity within the system, all we need to channelize in the right direction. And for me, I always call this year should be a called as a business year. And we have to promote our local business. We have to incentivize our local investor by making a business as a business friendly environment. So all these kind of initiative would be forthcoming. And I just wanted to add that in the next week we are organizing a 3-day conference where the agenda is how we can develop an actionable plan that actually materialize this Udan Pakistan into a more of policy action, and government can be benefited from those policy direction or policy action to streamline this fire's plan as well as the ambitious agenda of Udan Pakistan.
Right. Komal, I want your take on this as well, because while reports such as the ADB point us towards a positive future and, of course, improvement than where we were in the past, I want your take on looking back, of course, since the incumbent government took power, and with, of course, the IMF program and the extended fund facility, and the ways in which we are, of course, moving forward in terms of negotiations on conditionalities and then managing the domestic economic issues. I want your take on how well of a job do you think we've done on that front, and in terms of the input that has been given by the government and the finance ministry, the improvements that and the steps that have been taken, how much of those do you think are reliable or have the potential to be consistent and to sustain what numbers we're actually currently looking at? And I want to understand for the general public, can we really hope for a brighter situation given the past recent history?
Thank you, Sana, for this question. But just to be cautious and take a cautious approach, because vision 20 in retrospect, vision is always, what is that thing? 2020 vision is perfect, or retrospect, or looking back it's perfect, whatever. So economists are notoriously known for making all the wrong predictions and then being fired for it all over the world all the time. So I'm going to not comment on that at all, because it is yet to be seen. There is absolutely no reliability or predictability when it comes to the reform system or ecosystem in Pakistan, because so many factors, so many intermingled factors contribute to this. We are largely a very reactionary economy. We are emotional people, and we can see that in the stock market recently, how once we got the news, I think we're going to come to that part in the second part of the show. We're going to come and discuss that. But just to give that as an example of how much our emotions as a nation factor into our politics, political decisions factor into our financial decisions in our financial markets. We are a very sentiment-driven kind of, it's a very sentiment-driven volatility throughout this process. So I'll be wary of making any kind of prediction on how reliable these reforms are. But because we are a reactionary and emotionally driven market and economy, I would say that all of these things are looking good. Let's look at the macroeconomic indicators. Inflation definitely has, we can't say inflation has fallen, but inflation has grown at a slower rate, and that has been consistent. So as long as we can kind of hold that, that will have its impact on the foreign exchange market stability. We've been holding that. The State Bank is doing a great job in controlling that and actually making the interest rates go down as well. So if we are going to consistently hold that position, things will look good. We will definitely have, we'll see an impact on the import basket as well. And since we are an oil-dependent economy, that would also have its impact. But nonetheless, a lot of external circumstances and situations and our reaction to this external news is also going to get into our way. So yes, just like Nasir also said, reforms are very important. And the momentum for reforms has to be maintained. But to do that, we have to also invest into more of investor information, more of the everyday or the consumer or the voter, their information and their understanding of how the economy works, how the politics work. So that means that we have to, it's not about education, it's about how informationally symmetrical we are or how informationally efficient we are as an economy. So news, for example, has to be very clear, clean. So we have to kind of take control of the reactionary element in the reform process as well as in the financial markets for this momentum to continue. So I think I'm starting off with a very heavy statement, but I think that is for all of this to be stabilized and for all of this momentum to be consistent, we have to work on this behavioral element as well. Because this is what has gotten into our way in many, many different ways in many different sectors when it comes to the reform process.
Right, absolutely. And building on that, Farrukh, I want your take on what we were talking about just yesterday. We had the Mineral Investment Summit, and we were discussing in detail in terms of the larger scale projects and sectors that need to be utilized at home and what we can really build upon and what the government is doing in this regard, while of course at the same time managing the economic conditions. And I want your take then when we talk about these factors and these numbers and indicators, and then in parallel take a look at what is going on with different sectors and the kind of investment and projects that we want to be doing in. Is this something that that has been catered for in terms of how exactly we're going to encompass all of these activities all together, and then take that forward in terms of the kind of numbers that we want to look at in terms of the economy?
Right, Sana, thank you very much for the question. I think the catchphrase that we have to the word that we have to keep repeating to ourselves is a reform, reform, reform.
Yeah.
And if after that there is any other word that is important, it is transparency, transparency, transparency. But I wanted to actually start on a lighter note. Listening to Komal, I just wanted to say there should be mulligan for her. When economists are facing such a strange kind of headwinds all over the world, that Larry Summers, somebody who is actually a savant in these matters, his mind has turned to mush. There 1 minute he is predicting inflation, in the same minute, in the next breath he is saying a recession, not even stagflation for that matter, recession, right? So if that is happening, I think economists should be given some kind of leverage, and so there's some you can cut some slack. But Komal, to your point, there's no tax on imagination, and I hope that we keep on imagining good things and we try to actually argue that those things can be implemented. Now, Sana, the point is that for past 20 years, 30 years, our biggest problem has been our failure to rise up to opportunities, and there were incredible opportunities. Remember, in 30 years, India started from nowhere. It was selling its gold, and now it's an economy of renown, right? Fifth largest economy right now. And look at China, that also started at that time. So there was no dearth of opportunities. Our problem that has been pointed out is that A, we have been reactionary, but the second thing is that we lose focus. So what you need at this moment is singular focus on economy. And I am pleased to say that at least I see that happening, because in the past for 30 years, whenever we would go to IMF, I would actually try to find Pakistan's Manmohan Singh. We couldn't find any, right? And we ended up with Shaukat Aziz and God knows how many other people. But in the end, what has happened is this combo, especially of the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister and Army Chief, seems to be actually steering the country in the right direction. At least there's push for it. Of course, we keep on talking about opportunities and we don't see those opportunities immediately materializing, but there is some momentum in that direction. Usually, all those pitches that you hear, Sana, right now, they take 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years to materialize. But at least as long as we are focusing on these matters, we can move in the right direction. My only concern is that reform where it is needed, the structure of our bureaucracy, that is not changing. And that means that those post-colonial bottlenecks that we inherited are continuing to function. And there are countries in which, despite those bottlenecks, they have succeeded, like India. But unlike India, we don't have this massive big brother deeping, breathing down our necks. We do have that, India does not have. So what we need to do is, A, focus only on economy. Second one is to perform reform, keep on focusing on reform. And the third one is, if we get an opportunity to, make better, improve our relations with our neighbors, we should try that, doing that as well. Unfortunately, there are two kinds of Taliban. One sits, the one has taken over New Delhi, the other one Kabul, and these are two countries that have mattered the most to us, apart from China and the Arab world. Sadly, we haven't been able to, make an impact, and we haven't actually reached across the aisle, so to speak, and that actually creates a problem. And then external shocks that we were talking about, they compound, because these are two entities that have always exerted some kind of influence on Pakistan's policy. If reform continues, if our focus continues, and our singular focus is on economics, I think we can improve in a very short while.
Yes. Right. Faisal, you had a question.
Yes, Sana, with your permission. Dr. Nasir, obviously the whole world is talking about the tariff. Everyone is concerned about it. We as a country, obviously right now we are sitting at a growth rate of 2.5. We are looking at 3 for the next year. Can we say that this tariff mantra is going to be a challenge as well, an additional challenge when it comes to, of course, our own growth rate, the way we are moving forward? And if so, then what can be done in this context? Should we be looking for other markets, or should we be creating some more room for the international economy to be in touch with us more?
I think whenever there is a crisis, there is also opportunity attached with that crisis. So there is like a global crisis with these tariff wars. So we are not only one country that facing this kind of restriction, but equally it is important for us to increase our potential for the other country. Like look at the example of China. If they face massive tariff restriction, look at the other countries like Bangladesh. So if they are all considering the same situation, then probably they have to divert their product to the other countries. And now they are looking for the new markets. Probably this also open a window for us to negotiate with China, to negotiate with even Bangladesh, to negotiate with other neighboring countries, to come up with another trade model where we can basically extract the dividend within our neighboring countries. And also the potential for us in the coming future, currently our export is limited to a very few areas. Like we have around one of the main our exporter, our trade partner is the US, and other is the EU. But what about the other countries, like what about the GCC? What about the Central Asian countries? What about the African countries? All they have the different dynamics. And now this is the opportunity for the global world. Even it's not for us, it's opportunity for everyone to come up with a new trade model, to expedite the existing structure and to increase the export. The our survival to me is the one liner is the export surplus. And we are lacking in creating export surplus over the last 70 years. None of our product is competitive in the global market if we work on equal basis. So we need some sort of support from the other countries in terms of some sort of concessions or in terms of some sort of like a free trade agreement. But whenever we have a free trade agreement, like we have a multiple agreement with China, with other countries, we end up with the lost kind of situation. So the ideal situation for us is to look into this as an opportunity window, try to create export surplus in a few areas. We may not be able to expedite our industrial development in our area, but we have to identify a key area, like as we said in earlier discussion, that IT is one of the key sector, like the medicine production is one another sector where we have some kind of comparative advantage in few areas, and we have to be more vigilant on those sides. Definitely, this would be one kind of binding constraint if we really have to materialize and to achieve a high growth, because our high growth trajectory depends on the export, and we are aiming to double our export in next few years. But how we can do that if this is a massive tariff restriction? And I heard that the government is planning to have a high level meeting with the US like authorities to negotiate about these kind of restriction, because there is a kind of a resistance or some sort of retaliation from all countries. Look at the recent announcement by the China. So then it means the US have to reconsider, because the US can't live without all these countries, because it creates a lot of cost for the local people at the US. So that it means there is a internal resistance. So we have to be more vigilant. We have to be like a super efficient in terms of negotiating with all trade partners, not only the US, but all other trade partners. Now we have the opportunity to renegotiate with the China. We have the opportunity because now we have a very like a decent relation with the Bangladesh. We have to negotiate with these neighboring countries as well. We have to create some sort of, as you said, a favorable environment with Afghanistan. We have to create some sort of working relation with other countries, those are in our neighborhood. So all these kind of negotiation, working relations are super important in this era and in coming era. And our survival, let me reiterate that, is depend on creating export surplus. And for export surplus, our prime focus should be our domestic investor. Because look at the advisories, those are passed by the European countries and other based on the current situation in the country. It would be very difficult to convince international investor. Currently, there is some kind of G2G investment, but that never be such a profitable like a negotiation. We have to convince like a private sector to come and invest. But the best part of that investment would be the forthcoming behavior of our local investor. If they start making investment, they can create a link with the global community and convince them, look, this is the venture, this is the area where you can invest. Then we will be in a position to offer lot of stuff to these people. Just I want to add one more
All right.
comment. As
Okay.
Iqbal said, the economists always make a prediction and that never materialize. These predictions are super important because that give an idea to streamline your policy decision, because without that prediction, without that number, you can't make policy decision. And of course, the last comment that the entire economy is based on the news, and the news has always a very important role. It's not an emotional economy, it's a news affected. News effect is everywhere. Look at the the behavior of cryptocurrency. Whenever there is a positive, it is exponentially have a growth. And if you look into the other side of the economy, even in the very hardcore trade, the news have a very strong signal to the investor as well as the trader.
Right, absolutely. And since we're already on the topic of tariffs also, I'll come to that a bit later. But Komal, I first want your take on what Mr. Nasir said in terms of the forthcoming behavior of investors. And I want your take on when we talk about convincing the private sector, bringing in the private sector, bringing in local investors, isn't that more about incentivizing that or making that situation favorable for them in order for them to understand that? So I want your take on where do we stand in that sense in terms of bringing that to the table and offering that to the private sector so that this is a lucrative offer for them. Because while we talk a lot about FDI, we've set up the SIFC, we're trying to get in a more bilateral and multilateral engagement. And there's a lot of emphasis on that, at least in terms of what is being said and talked about. But I want your take on how does that balance out in terms of what we're doing at the local front and the kind of incentives that we're offering to the private sector and to local companies in order to make that decision at home easier for these companies.
And Komal, if you can also shed some light on obviously when we talk about incentives, at the same time every investor seeks some kind of security, his investment security. Can we provide that, and whatever the demands an investor would be seeking from the government, can they be ensured?
Thank you, both of you, for your questions. I think the answer to that would be linked, at least in my mind. So yes, absolutely on point about incentivization and security of investment. At the end of it, we have to understand, again, I will refer to the emotions and the behavioral aspect of things, particularly because I am trained as a behavioral economist, so I have a bias there. I will be open about it. But definitely investors, a business community anywhere in the world, see, we have a business confidence index. It is an important quantification of behavior and sentiment that drives the market. Very rightly said, news does impact, and news and reaction to news are very linked to behavior and human emotion, which I think is the key to designing and implementing a right policy. So I think in terms of design, yes, Pakistan may have gone wrong in the past, and many countries go wrong in the past, but mostly it is not in the design of policy or design of incentives or design of, let's say, the regulatory framework. That is the bigger question. It is about the delivery or the implementation of that. So for an investor, time is money, and more than that, the mental bandwidth, the mental effort that you have to exert to utilize or benefit from a particular incentive. Just it's a completely different topic, but for SMEs, for example, a lot of these agricultural loans are, a lot of farmers utilize these are the loans from Aartis. And they charge around 80 to 90%. The cost of getting that kind of finance is 80 to 90% on the principal, which is a very high cost. And yet, small farmers prefer to go to an Aarti over a bank or over another more institutional, like formal institution. Why? Simply because of the mental cost. The mental bandwidth or the mental effort that an investor or a business person or someone who's trying to make a profit to utilize an incentive or a scheme or whatever the government is offering, if that is too high, and that in terms of time, in terms of effort, then they would be willing to pay the high financial cost for it rather than to pay the mental cost for it. So we have to understand when we are designing these policies, what are the hidden costs, and it is not about the under the table transactions. It is about the hidden cost of exerting effort, understanding those policies, overcoming the trust deficit. Like, is that going to get me into trouble? Is that going to be too much trouble if I go to this institution? Will that have repercussions on and because of the policing, right, the way it has been done in the past, will it actually make my business go bankrupt eventually? So these are the kind of concerns investors have. So when it comes to security, we are thinking about, okay, contract enforcement, intellectual property rights in some ways, but how tight are the contracts, how legal system is supporting. But somewhere, given my analysis of how the regulatory framework has been designed in so many years in Pakistan, there is hardly any consideration, or it's not at least written down in paper, on paper, that there is a mental cost to it. And how are we making it, when we are talking about ease of doing business, how are we making it easier on the mind and the time? We are reducing time, we are reducing processes, we are reducing costs, but somewhere mindlessly, we are not thinking in terms of how is it actually translating on the ground. So I think the key, again, instead of using the very banal and trite word, the problem is not implementation, but the problem is also understanding the user experience. Maybe we need to change the vocabulary around how we design policies. So if we look into the user experience of what this product, which is a policy or an incentive structure, is offering to the person, then I think we will be able to maybe address this issue better. I'm still trying to stay as generic as possible because there is not a specific question that has been raised, but if you want me to answer it on the tariff side, I'm happy to do so.
Yes, I was just coming to that. So with regards to what we have seen with the US administration, of course, the ways it's impacting countries and most notably China, of course, how much of that actually impacts Pakistan as well? And I want your take in terms of what Dr. Nasir was also referring to in terms of the opportunity of increasing our exports. And this is a lot of discussion going on internationally as well as to how much of other economies are actually going to respond to this particular challenge and then develop their own systems or their own products more so. But this has been a problem for Pakistan for quite some time now in terms of us increasing our exports. Do you think that it's just a matter of opportunity, and does that opportunity truly even exist in this scenario when we talk about and when we understand what the Trump administration is trying to achieve? Does that create that vacuum in space for Pakistan, and does that vacuum actually help or enable Pakistan to achieve what kind of level of exports that we have been wanting to for decades now?
I'm not sure I understand your question very well, Sana. Maybe I'm wrong.
Let me repeat that, Komal. My
Go
question is with regards to when we talk about increasing our exports, do you think that the Trump administration's increase of tariffs offers us that opportunity? And if it does, do you think that's enough for us to do that?
So looking at the past, let me, of course, past is a good predictor of the future. Looking at in the past, I think more than the tariff rates, the structural infrastructure, both hard and soft infrastructure issues have plagued Pakistani exports more than anything else. So with China, for example, we also have an unequal FTA. With US, we have been in an unequal trade relationship. With most of our trade partners, we have, despite, I don't think we have great tariff structures that are favoring Pakistan in any way. So but even if there were, in some cases, for example, with the GSP plus and definitely with China, we do have an advantage. But we haven't been able to utilize it, not because there hasn't been a good negotiation on it, but that is part of the problem. But mostly these are infrastructural issues like domestic production. Why energy crisis, lack of utilities or very expensive utilities or roads not connecting to ports very efficiently, or no facilities on the ports. Maybe there's no refrigeration facility somewhere, time taken for custom clearance. So these are the kind of issues that have been plaguing our, the growth in exports. So for Pakistan, I think we cannot jump the gun and we cannot become part of the global debate that much. Yes, again, that is why I started off with the word reactionary, because for example, if the US has 104% tariff, cumulatively for China, they also responded with an 89%. If they have, for Pakistan, they have around 29%. So it's not even a comparable situation. So for us, we are mostly reacting to what's happening in the Asian markets, how the other players in the Asian market are acting. So we are kind of also swimming with the tide. But if we look at the domestic market and the structural issues that plague our exports, or that have been, plaguing our growth in exports, it's to do with things like access to finance, not strong contract enforcement, just simple things like very, very expensive electricity, very expensive gas, or maybe not even available at all in some places. We look at the special economic zones, and back in 2018, I did a survey. I mean, things have improved since then, but not drastically enough to say that that isn't valid anymore. But for example, in Hatar, there were two, I think, enterprises who had their units there, and they were supplying electricity with their own generators. There was no electricity there. There was not even a paved road. So things like that in our special economic zone. So we are offering great fiscal incentives, a 10-year tax break on income tax or sales tax or whatever. So our incentive structures may be great and may be competitive globally, but when we come to the on the ground situation, we're a completely different ballgame. We take eons to process an application. We have so many regulatory hoops that we have to jump. We have lack of facilities, like I said, utilities. Then we have such a high cost of getting that. Then land is too expensive. So our issues are completely homegrown. So we have to address those first before we can start thinking about tariffs and tariff structures and our trade relationship with other countries.
Right. Dr. Nasir, I want your take on this as well. I know you've spoken from the Pakistan's perspective, but I want your take also in terms of the ways in which we have seen, like Komal was referring to, China responding, and of course other countries, like there is of course talk of devaluing the currency in Japan, and we've seen other countries also respond in their own ways, and the possibility of shifting away from the dollar economy. I want your take on how much of this will actually benefit the US population as is being talked about by the Trump administration.
I think the free trade always have a much higher welfare implication as compared to the restricted trade. Even we also advocated for Pakistan before this Trump administration action that we must reduce our tariff to streamline our trade and to enhance the trade sector. And look at the example of other countries, though substantially reduce their tariff margin to increase their export as well as import. So if if the cost of one item is like $100 and you are imposing a 30% tariff, it becomes 130. So the American people have to pay 130. But if they recalculated that they have the domestic potential to replace that product with the domestic production, I'm not sure they have the cost of production much lower than what China actually producing at the supplying to them. If you look at the US market, you can find everywhere the Chinese product and their cost and the prices are much lower as compared to what the US people are producing. So that kind of a restriction is not viable in any way for any country. It's not for the only Pakistan or the China or the Bangladesh. It's not even viable for the US. Probably to me, this is some kind of a political economy where they are trying to leverage this tariff as an instrument, as a weapon to materialize some hidden agenda. And maybe you can find in the next year and so that what kind of agenda that they have and they try to materialize. Especially look at the negotiation that they have with Canada after imposing the first kind of tariff restriction and the other neighboring country. Similarly, they have the trade war with the China, and they are trying to curtail using these kind of instruments, but they are not a valid instrument. They are not a valid kind of action that will really promote, because the global world is already in recession, and now the global world is trying to recoup the recessionary period and come up with some sort of a very decent growth rate. But this have a very huge implication, especially after this Ukrainian war and the reaction coming from the European Union. The question related to the de-dollarization and the other currency is like a very immature question at this stage. Probably it will take a decade to materialize that kind of an alternative currency market where they can compete with the US dollar.
We're almost out of time. Thank you very much, Dr. Nasir, Iqbal, and thank you very much, Ms. Kenneth, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. It's a pleasure having you all as always. Farrukh, anything you'd like to add before we conclude?
Yeah, regarding the overall structure of how our policies are made and how exactly our policy instruments are structured, there is no doubt, it is true. But it shows you a systemic rot, right? It shows you the kind of bureaucratic decay that has to be taken care of. If it is not, then you are going to have the similar kind of problems again and again. That means the people who should have been making the policies are not making the policies, because the fine print is also important. Regarding America, I think that you will be astonished by what I am going to say.
Okay.
I think that by imposing a 104% tariff on China for now, and I think it is temporary, and whatever China has retaliated, both sides seem to have actually helped President Trump. Because have you seen the stock markets? Yesterday all pundits were saying that the stock markets are going to be routed. Now Dow is in green, it is going up. Why? Because there are other hands involved also. India also gained a lot of influence, and the problem is they don't see the economic gratification, they keep on asking for political one. So today they got their political gratification, because of China, America, TIF, and also because of that person that is being handed over to India. So all of a sudden America's economy is performing better. The only thing is, I don't think there is any chance of recession, number one. Number two, whatever it is, India and other countries, and this comes from a good place. Honestly, stop showing your hand for political short-term gains, because you're going to damage your interest in the longer term also.
Right. Thank you so much, Farrukh, and thank you, Faisal, for joining us in the debate. As always, that's all that we have time for. We'll now see you tomorrow.